This kind of dovetails into, we were talking about, how to approach family members, et cetera. But this issue of not so much how we deal with this, but once it's been dealt with, you have people who have perhaps lived the bulk of their lives with this particular virus, and now they are either cured or in the process of being cured. And what do we do to help them?
Right.
And this is something that you have kind of grasped by the horns and run with in your RR program.
Right.
So why don't you go ahead and tell us about that?
Shortly after I published the book, I started getting emails and phone calls from people saying, wow, I wish I'd have seen this book before, or I wish I'd have known this before, I wish I'd had some help when I was getting out of religion myself. And it was amazing how many people, I did not write that book to convert anybody. I wrote that book to fellow non-theists so they could understand what was going on out there in the world, because I didn't see any books that were doing that. And I like Dawkins, Hitchens, Harrison Dennett, but they're none of them psychologists, and they do not get in the heads of people, and they really don't tell how the gears work, if you will. So that's what I was focused on. But I started getting all these phone calls. I started getting all these emails from people saying, I need help getting out of religion, or I want to get out. I've gotten out of religion now. How do I deal with my mother-in-law? How do I deal with my spouse? She's still really religious. And how do I raise my children? Right. And I realized there's nobody out there offering that kind of help to folks. Right. So I started this group. I just announced it one week, and the next week 11 people showed up. And we heard the most amazing stories from people talking about how they were struggling with things like guilt from, just because you leave religion doesn't mean the guilt doesn't go. You were taught that from a really young age. Or how do I deal with my wife? We had one fundamentalist evangelical Baptist who was even a part-time preacher. He's now an atheist, but his wife's still very, very religious. And he came to our meeting and said, how do I deal with this? And that was a really interesting conversation. But we're getting those kinds of conversations. And I started saying, wow, lots of people need this. So we organized this group called Recovering from Religion, and it's recoveringreligionist.com on the internet. And we're trying to get leaders in all sorts of cities around the country. We have 20 groups now, leaders all over the country, convening these meetings once a month and letting people just sit down in a room and talk about what are the problems. How do you deal with your children? We had one guy come in and says, I have 10-year-old children. I've been raising them as Christians this whole time. Now I'm an atheist. Right. What do I do? It's going to be confusing to them. And I don't have the answers. And by the way, the people who are leading the meetings are just other people recovering from religion. They're not psychologists or social workers. They're normal people. But it's kind of like modeled on the AA model. It's self-help. We come together. We talk about these things. And the amazing ideas that came out of that were as good as any clinician probably would have come up with, I've noticed. So it's truly self-help, and these people are coming in, learning a little bit. When you hear a Mormon and an ex-Jehovah's Witness and an ex-Baptist all sitting in the room at the same time, and they're saying the same thing. It matters not what religion. You can see the God virus was working perfectly in all three of them, even though it's a totally different religion. Right. It's just amazing to watch that going on.
Now let me bounce something off you, because you mentioned just before that now Dawkins doesn't have your background in psychology as a professional, but it is from Dawkins that we have the concept of memes.
Oh, and yes, and I jumped on that.
Sounds exactly like, and then we also, one of our co-hosts, Don Baker, some years ago, did a lecture on what he called the Christianity meme.
Yes.
So I think that this idea has been explored. It seems like you've just gone into it being a professional in the field more in depth than anyone has before. And I'd like to, maybe to hear, say, how valid how on target was Dawkins when he thought of memes and memetics? And but what didn't he do with that idea well enough, perhaps, that you think could have really improved upon the concept more, so that we could understand a little bit better how the God virus, as you refer to it, works? Because my question about memes has always been, as a layman's perspective, well, how is it any more useful to think of these ideas? Let's say all throughout human civilization, people have had great ideas and you've had bad ideas. And it's sort of Darwinistic, right?
Very Darwinistic.
The good ideas catch on and they stick around, and the bad ideas get kicked to the curb. So how is it more useful then to come up with, say, this concept of memes or mind viruses or what have you, to think of these ideas above and beyond simply understanding them as, well, they were really good ideas and everybody liked them?
Oh, that's
very simplistic.
Very simplistic and inaccurate.
Right. Okay.
Why do hookworms survive in the guts of animals, and they survive for millions of years? Why do tapeworms? Why do other parasites, malaria, why do they survive? They're certainly not good for the organism they're in.
They're
but
good for themselves.
But they're good for themselves.
okay.
The God virus is the same thing. It cares not for you. The God virus is so powerful in some ways that it can cause people to commit suicide. That's what suicide bombers do. It also can be so powerful as to get people to commit genetic suicide. That's what nuns and priests do. They're not allowed to propagate themselves. Now, if we had a disease running around the United States that caused people to no longer propagate, we'd be very concerned about that. Right. Well, that disease is called Catholicism. And it causes nuns and priests and other people sometimes not to propagate.
Although among the laity, they encourage big families.
That's the way the God virus works there, too. It goes both ways. Now, there's a way to understand this in fairly simple terms. There's 3 types of memes. And I don't think Dawkins or Dennett hits the nail on the head quite as well as I'd like them to. There's 3 types. And I don't want to get big into memetics. That's a whole study itself. But there are beneficial memes. Algebra is a beneficial meme. There are benign memes. The hula hoop. That was a benign meme. An idea that went wild and then died. And it's kind of come back in some areas. But it didn't help anybody that much. It didn't hurt anybody that much. Yeah. Then there's parasitic memes. That's the third kind. Parasitic memes infect your mind and take it over and do things that are bad for you and then try to get into the next person. There are memes that are not religions or are not seen as religions. For instance, in the book, I explore Marxism. Marxism was a very vicious parasitic meme, if you will. So it's not just, I think Marxism was actually a religion. If you look at the way it was structured, Lenin is entombed in Moscow, and people come by and worship him, literally. In North Korea, you got Kim Il-sung, who's president for life eternally, even though he's been dead for 20 years. That's pretty religious to me. It looks very much like a pharaoh who is now godlike after he dies.
Yeah, like objectivism with the Ayn Rand and the cult of personality.
Yeah, it just, if you look at the way Egypt did its pharaohs, Kim Il-sung and Lenin are the same way.
They're pharaohs.
Yeah, they're pharaohs. That's what it amounts to. So you can look at religion and realize that it's just a parasitic meme. It gives nothing, not a hoot about you. It just wants to get from you to your children, you to your next door neighbor, someone else. It's constantly pushing. It's constantly mutating, trying to get in. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does, actually. I mean, it helps is really how memetics and the idea of mind viruses are different from just understanding ideas that are popular versus unpopular ones.
Right. For your viewers, if you don't want to read all of Dawkins, go read a little essay he wrote some years ago called Viruses of the Mind. Just Google it, and it's excellent, excellent read. That's what caused me to write this book. I'd read all this other stuff, but when I read Viruses of the Mind, I thought, dang, I can take, as a psychologist, and really work this through and really expand it. He did not expand it. He didn't talk about how guilt works. He didn't talk what the infection strategy is. Because malaria has an infection strategy using mosquito to get from me to you. What's religion do? It has an infection strategy as well. And different religions have different infection strategies.
Right.
Yeah.
So Dawkins' premise was strong enough that you, as a psychologist, could take it and go, oh yeah, there is something to work with
And
here.
it needed to be done.
Develop the idea.
Right. It needed to be developed, I thought.